Sten, we're live.
Thank you, Larry the Liberty Guy. This is Mike Stenhouse, your host on In the Dugout. Welcome to another session. A quick reminder that tomorrow we will be joined by former Red Sox, Expos, and Orioles general manager Dan Duquette. No politics, just baseball tomorrow. But today, in just a few minutes, I'll be talking with members of the Brown University baseball team who were just notified that their Ivy League baseball season had been canceled for the second straight year. Then in the second half of the show, Dr. Andrew Bostom, our epidemiologist and regular contributor to our show, will join me to discuss what he heard from the players from a medical data perspective. But what does Ivy League sports, you might ask, have to do with the kind of political discussion our show normally engages in? The answer is everything. Since this pandemic began a year ago, elitists in government decided that they know what's in our own best interest, and they took it upon themselves to manage our lives. I mean, literally manage our lives on a daily basis. Notwithstanding legitimate medical concerns, our government took the extraordinary and unprecedented steps of telling us where and if we could travel, study, worship, console or grieve an ill or departed loved one, shop and dine, and which businesses and jobs were essential enough to be allowed to continue. Then we learned that the medical community was playing games with us. They were being dishonest. The WHO, the CDC, so-called medical experts, state departments of health. Instead, they chose to play petty politics, immoral, and as it turned out, often deadly politics. And ostensibly striving to flatten the curve and stop the spread, the medical community, beholden to a false narrative created by their political masters, instead opted to spread the fear, hiding inconvenient facts or deriding what we now know are life-saving treatments. God forbid we allow the notion that this virus might actually be manageable. No, they could not allow society to flatten the fear. More power and more control has always been the goal of big government socialists, and more public fear was the means to gain that power. The COVID pandemic presented the perfect opportunity. Many state governors, instantly drunk with unchecked emergency powers they never before could have imagined they might wield, seized unilateral control over their governments, imposed restrictive executive order after executive order, and then empowered brown shirt type squads of minions to harass the people and enforce their harsh mandates. Mandates and oppressive rules that were designed to support a political agenda, an agenda that had little to do with medical science or stopping the spread. This is what big government socialism does: exploit any crisis by creating a false narrative that they're looking out for you, then impose arbitrary restrictions on your lives, which actually increases power for themselves, the ruling class elites, government elites, or in this case, college elites, at the expense of your freedoms. And they hope you're stupid enough to buy their line that it's all for your own good. And if you're among the few who are smart enough to figure out the game, they bet that you'll be too timid to stand up and say something, or too busy to make the effort to come together with others in some kind of organized resistance. And ultimately, if you do have the temerity to speak out, well, then they and their corporate cronies will simply conspire to cancel you. And remember, it's all for your own good, you sheepish people. But government tyranny is not the only chapter in this sad story. Perhaps nowhere do we see more extreme and absurd examples of this "we know what's best for you" socialism than among the elitists in America's academic institutions. And nowhere in academia is this elitism more pronounced than among the East Coast know-it-alls of the Ivy League, of which my alma mater, Harvard University, is a member. So today, in keeping with our tradition and in the dugout, I will wear my cap, my Harvard cap, as a former baseball player who played against Brown University myself. But I must say I wear it today with a little shame and embarrassment because of what you're about to hear. Last spring, virtually all sports across the nation, professional and amateur, were shut down, and probably justifiably so back then because we didn't know fully yet what we were dealing with. But since then, slowly but surely, as we learn more, we've seen recreational and sports activities return. No, but not in the Ivy League. They haven't learned anything. You might remember last fall, after many college football conferences returned to competition, that there was much controversy about the Big Ten and Pac-12 keeping their football teams shut down, as did the Ivy League. But not everyone acquiesced. Many players, families, and coaches from prominent Midwest and West Coast universities banded together to form a resistance. They raised national awareness in the media, like the players you're about to hear from right now will soon do, and combined with the public urging of former President Trump, they convinced those conferences to reopen their football seasons so that their student athletes could compete and salvage some measure of their college athletics experience. It's a valuable experience. And this winter, basketball and other sports have also resumed, albeit under strict guidelines, but not in the Ivy League. Why? Well, come on. They're smarter than everyone else, and because they care more about their students than anyone else, right? Give me a break. Today, we know infinitely more about this virus than we did last year, and there's almost no reason to succumb entirely to the fear as the Ivy League continues to do. We have effective treatments to deal with illnesses and new vaccines to prevent infections, all while herd immunity begins to set in, meaning there are fewer and fewer among us where the disease might spread. And pretty much from the beginning, we knew that young and healthy individuals, like these college athletes you're about to meet, were almost never at much risk of any severe illness. Now today, add in the fact that the flu and virus season is naturally waning, warm spring weather is coming, and that the outdoors, as we have always known, presents a much safer environment for any group activity, including sports. But none of these facts and none of this actual science matters to the arrogant snobs who run our Ivy League institutions. Why? Because they're intellectually superior to everyone else, and they have to demonstrate that. Quoting from last week's Wall Street Journal, the Ivy League Council of Presidents announced Thursday that it would not attempt to stage spring sports in 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic, making it the only conference in the NCAA's Division I that remains completely on the sidelines for the fourth consecutive sports season. These decisions are grounded in public health best practices. Best practices, a council statement said. What best practices? What do Ivy League officials know that other athletic conferences don't know? Well, we don't know. They won't tell us. Of course, we couldn't possibly understand their superior reasoning. Meanwhile, virtually every other aspect of our social, religious, recreational, and professional lives are resuming at some meaningful level, except for Ivy League athletics. Why, we wonder? Is there something else going on? The answer is yes, there's a lot else going on. Historically, the intellectual elites at Ivy League colleges have looked down on athletics as not being worthy of or potentially somehow diminishing of the value of an Ivy League education. But even these academic highbrows had to face the reality without college sports programs. Many of the best and the brightest, potential future leaders, would not choose to matriculate to their hallowed halls. So begrudgingly, Ivy League elites tolerated athletics at their institutions, but apparently no more. You see, now emerging is a new master, one that demands obsequious and unquestioned conformity to all of its identity politics grievances, the politically correct woke movement. What better way for Ivy League intellectuals to display their superiority than to prove that they are more woke than everybody else? That they, in demonstrating such deep care and concern for their students, would shut down the non-intellectual scourge of sports. That trampling over the rights and privileges of their own athletes, and by making a public show of canceling all Ivy League spring athletics, would somehow make themselves look good. Well, at least in the eyes of other aristocrats in academia. And predictably, as you heard in that statement, or in part of the statement I didn't read, the Ivy League claims that it's all in the students' best interests. What pompous foolishness. Rather than seek to be far from the PC madding crowd, these self-serving Ivy League elites are interested in one thing and one thing only: the desire to be seen as more intellectually woke than anyone else. The deranged need to be right smack in the middle of the left's madding crowd, deep in the never land of make-believe. Damn be the real-life student athletes who will suffer. The Ivy League has a larger political point they feel compelled to make. And this, my friends, is the essence of socialism and other authoritarian institutions, that the exercise and growth of their own power, whether a government or a school, especially when they can claim it's in your own or the national best interest, is more than enough reason for them to trample your freedoms. And this Ivy League example of intellectually justified fascism is a perfect classroom lesson about exactly where the left wants to take America. Total and unquestioned subservience to your new self-proclaimed woke masters. Why? Because, of course, they care more about you than you do yourself. And because it justifies their tyranny. I really hope they sleep well at night, comforted by their immense concern for you. And if this past year is any indication, it looks like the American sheeple are buying it. But what about the Brown University baseball team? Are they buying it? Here to ponder these ominous questions are 6 players on the canceled Brown baseball team right here in Providence, Rhode Island. Let's find out if they're buying the "we care so much for you that it's okay to cancel your season" line that the Ivy League is trying to sell them. So let's bring in our guests today from the Brown University baseball team, and let's activate their videos and microphones. Let's welcome Captain Colin Garner. Colin, say hello. Well, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? It's best if you do it yourself. Give us your name, where you're from, your class, and what position you play in the baseball team. Go ahead, guys. Start with Colin.
Yeah. So my name is Colin Garner. Captain on the team, or co-captain. I'm a starting pitcher. I'm majoring in economics, and I'm from South Texas.
South Texas. Good. Ryan?
I'm Ryan Fish. I'm a senior pitcher. I'm from Houston, Texas, so I'm only a couple of hours away from him.
2 good old Texas boys there, huh? Okay. Ryan. Go ahead. Yep.
I'm Jake Burley. I'm a sophomore catcher, and I'm from Hollister, California.
Okay.
I'm Ray Sass. I'm a sophomore infielder from just outside of Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, I love Nashville. I'm sorry, I said Ryan. I meant Ray. I love Nashville. Yeah, I went to see my son who played for URI when they played Vanderbilt down there. It was great. All right, let's go to Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach Fogle. I'm from Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm a junior left-handed pitcher.
From Providence. Where'd you go to high school?
Well, I'm originally from Cumberland, but now in Providence. I went to Cumberland High School.
Oh, that's great. Okay, and Charlie?
I'm Charlie Danielson. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I'm a junior pitcher.
Good. Well, welcome, guys. Thanks for taking time to appear today. Colin, as captain, let me start with you. Pretty much every other college Division I conference is playing ball. They've probably started their workouts. Many of them are probably on their southern trips right now. How does it make you and your teammates feel to know that you're the only Division I conference that's not taking the field right now?
Yeah, it's upsetting for us, especially for all the work we did and the extra precautions we had to take this year, specifically. But, it's just kind of disheartening for us.
Are you guys angry, or just taking it and, this is life and, this is how we got to deal with this?
I would definitely say I'm angry, especially since, this past weekend, you watched countless teams play their first games with no masks on. I had a teammate from the summer. He goes to Ole Miss. He hopped on a plane, flew to Texas, played in the Rangers Stadium with 12,000 fans. It's definitely hard to watch, I'd say.
Now, Jake, that's Jake who was just speaking, right?
Yeah.
You put out a tweet on that got quite a little bit of play. Almost every Division I, we're showing this to our fans. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, and you were retweeting. It looks like you were quite a bit jealous of this California baseball player who actually is taking the field to stop their season. You said, "This is why we are so upset. Do better." Who was that message geared towards?
The Ivy League presidents who made the decision. I think what's even more upsetting than how every other team is playing is the fact on how they announced their decision to cancel the season. It was a tweet, and we had no idea it was even coming out. There was just rumors the night before that there was a meeting and this decision might be made. we were
So,
not
so,
told
so
advance to the
it's not
final.
like they went to you guys and other athletes at Brown and across the league and sat down and said, listen, can we work out a way to do this? What do you guys think? They just on their own, without any input from you guys, just boom, canceled it. Who wants to comment on that?
It was tough. That definitely we weren't even included in the decision, and as Jake said, like we found out in a tweet, like our email that we received from our administrators came 3 minutes after the tweet was released. So just the fact that we weren't even mentioned in the thought process in the decision was tough for us to hear.
Well, Zach, just so happens, Zach, I'm also sharing a tweet I saw of yours, where you say, that was really to you by not being included was a sign of disrespect. I mean, listen,
Yes.
You guys are smart guys. You're Ivy League smart guys, great athletes, well-rounded young men. And you feel, does everyone agree that the league and the Council of Presidents has disrespected your guys' input on this?
Well, Mike, like when I think of other professional sports leagues like the NFL and the MLB, they have collective bargaining agreements. They have players' unions that meet with the owners of the teams and they strike a deal. And we're NCAA athletes, so we don't have a union. But I felt like we had very little input on this decision. I think if they reached out to us, it would have been very clear. We just want to play a season. I mean, I could follow whatever rules they set, any condition for it, just to play. I lost 2 seasons now, and it just feels like it's out of my hands. The decision was made for me.
We're again, anyone answer who would like to, or someone who hasn't spoken yet. Before the decision came down last week, what was your expectation? Was your expectation that they were going to find a way to play this year? Because we know you had been practicing under some very strict protocols and circumstances, but was the expectation that you were gonna be allowed to play, given the drop we've seen nationally in the cases?
The expectation that we had was basically to have conference play. Like we wanted to be able to, at the very least, play our conference rivals, be able to have this Ivy League championship caliber season to really be able to compete ultimately in the regional and then hopefully the College World Series. And to our understanding, like we were going to have that, for providing we followed protocol and everything like that.
So I imagine, Charlie, maybe you can weigh in here. I imagine I'm going to put up a quote from a tweet. I don't know if it's a tweet, but something from your coach, Grant Achilles, who apparently wasn't happy either with what was going on. So I assume that expectation that you would be playing kind of was trickled down through your coach, right? Because he would be your contact to the administration and the President's Council. Was he as surprised as you guys were? And it must have hit you like a ton of bricks when that expectation was dashed.
Yeah, absolutely. From the beginning, like going into the semester, the Ivy League had told us like the decision will be made. We'll see how the cases go. If we get to a certain point, then we'll okay the season. They let us all re-enroll for
A certain point. Did they define that?
Well, that's the thing. They didn't really define what the numbers had to look like. And to what extent like students on campus would have to be, stuff like that. And so they kind of just let us all re-enroll with the hope of a decision being made. But by the time, with the decision coming at this point in which our season wasn't even expected to start until April, in which vaccines would have rolled out at a much higher rate. It just seems like either the decision was made too rash to do it this early, or that a decision had kind of already been made before we had enrolled in the first place for this spring semester.
All right, but it's, God, I'm just trying to put myself, as a guy who played, I played 3 years before I got drafted at Harvard, and I just can't imagine you guys. Especially what you just told me. They told you if you get to some point, apparently you guys have been practicing in the fall and with very strict code. I assume you followed all the rules, all the protocols. Yeah. And then they don't define what that point is, right? They just leave it out there and then they just snatch it away from you in a minute. What?
Well, one of the things that we were able to infer about their decision was that, the Ivy League executive director said that this didn't boil down to testing strategies or safety protocols. It seemed more to be about the fact that the campus itself wasn't ready to raise to a new level of allowing travel and allowing rival teams to visit the campus and play us and have all those players on the field, 2 rosters on the field. So
in other words, they were afraid of the woke reaction.
Well, they wanted it to be so that everyone.
That's my words. You don't have to agree with it.
They wanted everyone to enjoy those things before, a specific group like athletes could have the privilege.
Ooh, those unintellectual scourge of athletes can't let you first, right? I mean, listen, I suffered through this at the Ivy League myself. How many at the upper levels look down on us. All right, let me do some quick show of hands on this. Well, first of all, does anyone raise your hand? Does anyone agree with the decision that was made this year? Okay. How many of you agree with the shutdown last year?
Last year. Everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we didn't know what we were dealing with then, and it was safe. Okay. Have any of you or any of your teammates, any of you guys ever tested positive for the coronavirus? Any of your teammates?
Yeah.
You have had some teammates? Were they very sick?
Not while we've been on campus, but I know that 2 guys in my class at least have had it at some point.
Were they very sick?
No, they just I think one guy said he had a headache, and then the other guy lost the sense of smell for a while.
Now, we were talking off air. Now, raise your hand. How many of you guys have aspirations still that your college baseball career might lead to a professional baseball career? So, 4 or 5 of you. Okay. Now, it's obviously difficult to scout you guys when you're not playing. But there were summer leagues. I didn't realize that some college summer leagues played last year. Did all of you? How many of you played in a summer league last year? Two. Okay. And did you notice there were scouts around?
Not to the point that it would have been in a normal summer for sure, especially since we only, like I said earlier, we only had 3 teams in our pod that we played over and over again.
All right, so you kind of had a pod like the NBA bubble or something like that kind of thing.
It wasn't nearly a normal season.
Okay.
My league definitely there was a small presence at some games when some of the guys, like my league had a good presence of Power 5 athletes on teams due to the lack of availability of summer leagues. So at those games, there was a small handful of scouts, but it was very reduced. And even the amount of people at the games in general was so like maybe 5% of the amount.
Right. And in those summer league teams, is there any spread of the virus among the teammates?
Not well.
So, I mean, in your guys' view, you can play this game and not spread the virus. But again, you brought up an interesting fact. Does everybody agree that this was less about medical spread of the virus than it was sort of more of a pretense of how it would look to have athletes? You think it's more that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. How does that make you? How does that make you feel?
I feel like we all just want to play. I would sanitize the ball every pitch to keep it safe so that we could play. I'd be
All right, good question. Would you guys play under strict masking and distancing, spread out your dugout?
Yes, absolutely.
And sanitizing balls? You'd all play under those conditions?
Yeah.
I would triple mask and ride in the bus and sanitize my hands every 5 minutes to travel safely.
Let me ask the opposite. How many of you play if it was just like the old days? There were no restrictions. How many of you would feel safe enough playing the old way? Most of you. Okay.
I would feel
either way, you just want to play ball, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Even
Charlie, what were you saying?
I would say I would feel safe enough. Would I think it's necessarily the right decision? No, I think there still should be some restrictions, especially when it comes to outside presence, because a lot like the whole Ivy League decision seemed to come down to like blanket standards that they had for all students. So what that meant, like restricting travel of all students, and that includes athletes. So that meant we couldn't play. But I think it was just those kind of standards and the refusal to unblanket everyone, even if like some sectors could have played. I get like some clubs could participate in things, but they just refused to open up to specific groups without opening up to the whole general public as a
All right,
whole.
since we're comparing since you guys have made the interesting point that they're comparing, we don't want to give privileges to athletes and not the rest of the Brown University community. Is that in essence true, or is there some part of the Brown University community that is allowed to meet, that is allowed to congregate or travel or anything?
Not that I know of. I know that they were starting to allow people to go to 20-person, like in-person classes with obviously masks and other safety measures in place. But all of those would also occur indoors and in direct contact with professors and TAs and stuff like that. And I feel like if anything, those are equally or more unsafe than it would be for us to participate in, which, I mean, there's plenty of restrictions. Like you didn't even necessarily, we could have played games where we just travel to a site, like neutral site games in which we probably wouldn't even necessarily have to bring our whole rosters. And I'm sure all of us after a traveling day would be perfectly fine to quarantine until our next game. We all are taking, I don't know of really anyone on our team who's taking any classes in person.
Okay.
So we would.
So at least they're being consistent, you think, with, even though you might disagree with the approach, at least they're being consistent with that approach?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I'd be willing, if playing meant that I had some extra privilege, being able to travel and whatnot, I'd be willing to give up going to in-person classes or having other privileges if it meant, that we play, just whatever, however we can make a deal.
NCAA eligibility. I assume, Ivy Leagues usually don't allow post-grad athletes like other conferences do, but are any of you, I don't even know if it's being allowed. Is it allowed? And would any of you consider maybe an extra year in college, extend your education so you could claw back some of the playing time you've missed? How many of you would consider that?
Got 4 years left. I plan to use them all.
Okay. And do you know, is that, after last year, are they giving some allowances back for your eligibility?
After last year, everyone got like a blanket year where everyone
Okay.
got another year. But given this year, it's a little different since we're the only people who aren't having a season.
Right.
Still kind of up in the air. We definitely, I think, are getting a year of eligibility back. But
Oh, that's right. So last year, everybody in the NCAA got the year. This year would be just Ivy League, so it'd have to be a special consideration. Oh boy.
exactly.
Ivy League did though pass a waiver for seniors this year that you could play in a post grad at your institution that you're still at. So like Ryan and I could, we'd have to apply for a master's program at Brown and obviously get in on our own standing. And if we got accepted, we could play as a graduate student in the Ivy League, but we couldn't like switch to another Ivy League school and play as a grad student there. You'd have to stay at your own institution.
Huh. All
And
right.
that came out just, I don't know, maybe a week or two before the decision. And that was kind of like a smoking gun that, their head is probably going towards not letting us play this year.
So how are you guys going to be this year? Are we going to kick Harvard's butts or what?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
All right. Now, I mentioned to you guys off air that my dad was the baseball coach at Brown for 10 years during the 1980s. And he would like you to know that he strongly supports your point of view, disagrees with the decision of the league. Your coach, Grant Achilles, let's go back and put up that tweet again that he put out, or his letter that was put out. And he says, I struggle to believe that our league's leadership ever legitimately intended for spring sports to return to competition. And he also goes on to mention the lack of transparency. What do you think about his statement? And let me ask overall if you think he has stood up for you guys during this process.
I definitely think he stood up for us. and especially in that tweet, lack of transparency, that was definitely like a theme we saw throughout the fall and the spring. Definitely in the fall, like we were told when we came back, like practices would be a possibility for us. And the only practices we had were athletic pod directed conditioning practices. We were not allowed it on our field the entirety of the fall. So it was lack of transparency was a big theme throughout the whole 2 semesters we've been here.
And when Colin
kind of-
mentioned, a smoking gun, when we got that notification about the waiver for a master's year, that it was like a signal that we wouldn't have a season. It felt like we got these slowly over time, but we weren't ever told we wouldn't have a season. We were just kind of giving hints.
Yeah, you're kind of maybe wondering what kind of restrictions are going to be on our season, right? But didn't anticipate this. All right, in my commentary, I made reference to how the Big Ten and Pac-12 parents, coaches, players really rallied together and did change the minds of the equivalent of your Ivy League Council of Presidents. Is there any such effort underway? And part 2 of that question, anybody chime in, is all hope lost? I mean, is there any hope that given the just the rapidly declining case numbers in this country and illnesses, that this decision might be reversed?
I don't think. I think it's done. I don't think there's a chance for a reversal. In terms of like a unified voice across the league, there hasn't really been. It's been, a couple alums from each university that, get together and they make their own like college, like I guess, petition, if you will. Like we had a Brown alum that submitted one to the Ivy League. I think the Yale baseball captain wrote his own little letter to the Ivy League. So it's been pretty.
But nothing in a coordinated fashion. You haven't talked to your counterpart at any other captains, or
it's hard because some of these schools, with not allowing students back, a lot of players didn't come back. So I think Harvard had minimal players that went back to school. I think the same with Princeton and Yale. So it's tough to get any sort of unified voice without having at least all or most athletes on campus.
Well, whoever mentioned it earlier was spot on when you talked about how professional sports have their players' unions, and you guys really have nobody representing you in any organized way, and maybe that's.
We're actually both on the student athlete advisory committee for Brown, and I mean I don't think there's been at a meeting since 2020, like spring of 2020. We reached out to a student.
Too inconvenient.
Yeah, there wasn't really any discussion. We were supposed to be like a group. I mean, there's probably 100 people in this group, and we're supposed to be like, a bridge between the like Ivy League to like other student athletes. And we just, haven't heard anything.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention earlier. There was absolutely no open dialogue between the administrators and the student athletes during this whole process. And like, we were never made aware of any conversations of any plan that was being formulated or any type of anything like that. So to go off of what our coach said in that tweet, that he thinks the Ivy League made this decision a long time ago and they never planned on having a spring season, I firmly agree with that, because they never even attempted to reach out to us and see what we had to say.
Even though you had that athlete council.
Yep.
All right, last question. Then I invite you guys to stay on. We'll turn your mics and things back off, but I would like you to listen to our Dr. Boston. He's actually a Brown credentialed epidemiologist who's a regular contributor, and he's a medical research, mostly medical research right now. But and you can feel free to raise your hand on this. I like to self-deprecate everything. Was I a little too harsh in my opening comments on the Ivy League? Let me know if you think I was just a tad too harsh. Okay, so I don't feel quite as like I stuck my neck out as I thought I was doing before that. Gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I would only advise never give up hope. Try to organize if you can. Your voices do matter if you can organize. That's what my work is about, organizing resistance to policies that we don't agree with. It's part of the Democrat process. Some people are for. So if there's any room for that, I would say don't give up hope and try to make a collective voice. It's how things work, and be on it. I know you guys were on Fox News, Fox and Friends. Was it yesterday, Monday morning or yesterday morning?
Monday.
Who was on the show? Raise your hand. I forget who was on. I saw the interview quickly. That was great. Great exposure for you guys. No, wait a minute, I got to ask you. Now, I heard you guys got some harassment for appearing on the dreaded evil Fox station. Is that correct?
We did get a little pushback. Anonymously granted that.
Oh, not even, they weren't even brave enough to do it out front, huh?
Yeah, mostly anonymously. But I guess the main thing I want to say is, we're not trying to like make light of this pandemic or come across as shallow or anything. Like we respect everything that's happened. Like, we have a heavy heart for everyone that's lost any loved one or anything, but it's just, it's proven it can be done, and I think the biggest thing is, I think this was a great opportunity for the Ivy League to, showcase their innovation, creativity in a way to make a really safe, atmosphere to play, and then allowing us to come back and also make a safe community. I think it was a
very, very well said. Much better than I said it, I would have to say. You're much more of a diplomat than I am. Gentlemen, thank you. I hope somehow it gets back. If not, when you're back in play next year. So it sounds like all of you will be back next year, maybe, hopefully, if you apply for grad school, and I'll come see you play. I did see you guys play 2 years ago when my friend Frank Caprio Sr. and his son played on your team. We went to a Saturday doubleheader game against Harvard. And I can't remember. I can't remember how that turned out. Was that, I think you split maybe that.
Yeah, we split that one.
Yeah, if I remember. But I enjoyed watching you guys play, and I hope we'll get a chance to do it again. Thank you, Zach, Charlie, Ray, Jake, Colin, and Ryan. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. You got to feel for these guys. I mean, you just heard them. All they want to do is play ball. And every other sports conference in America has found a way to play ball and do it safely. But yet the Ivy League elites, for a very interesting reason they brought up, I would have thought it was for medical reasons, but they bring up this fact, well, we don't want to allow athletes to do things that we're not allowing, like travel and get together in groups, that we're not allowing the rest of our Ivy League community to. That's an interesting argument. And while it may hold some merit on the one hand, again, every other university and major conference in America, as you heard these players say, found a way with whatever restrictions, protocols you want us to follow, we'll follow them. But every other major conference in America has found a way to get on the field, except the Ivy League. It's just not right. So, all right, let's bring in Dr. Andrew Boston. Andy, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me? I was having some microphone issues.
I can hear you.
Okay,
let's
good.
see here. Now you're coming through loud and clear. Let me see if I can see you. Oh, yeah, there you are. Okay, got you now. I got to readjust my screen. So what did you think about what you just heard?
It's very disheartening. I think, unfortunately, these young men have been so browbeaten. On the one hand, you sense a certain degree of resistance, and obviously, I think it just takes, in this day and age, it takes courage to appear on Fox News.
Right.
But they're in an environment where there's been no honest discussion of how COVID-19 affects the college community. And you're right, Mike, and they're right. In the spring, there were a lot of unknowns. There aren't those unknowns anymore.
Right.
And
we've learned.
Exactly. And the knowledge is not being applied. And now you begin to, you see cracks in the narrative that they're basically being the victims of, what this concurrent plague is, which is wokeism. In other words, the university is somehow in its perverse mindset feeling that this group of athletes, which is always different, college athletes are different. They study and they have the discipline of a sport that they have to train for and compete for with all its added pressures, et cetera. So instead of rewarding that, they're penalizing that and saying that, well, we'd have to sort of bend these, by the way, very arbitrary and absurd rules that we're applying to everybody else for you. And so therefore it's a bad example. That is a very bizarre way to think, Mike.
Yeah, it is. Let me go back before we come back on some of the more esoteric rationale that we heard from the players about why the Council of Presidents in Ivy League made that decision. From a medical point of view, is there any reason a group of young, healthy men or women,
right,
in Ivy League sports can't take proper protocols and can't compete safely on an athletic playing field?
Absolutely none. And beyond that, Mike, I mean, we have more evidence than that now. The huge Wisconsin high school sports study that's, admittedly it's a preprint, but you can read it for yourself. And you can criticize the methodologies if you want to, or see that it's a very well done study. I mean, their conclusions couldn't be clearer, just reinforcing what we already know about this virus, particularly with outdoor sports. I mean, it's just not an environment for
outdoor.
Yeah, it's just not an environment for transmission. And moreover, the added compulsiveness about masks doesn't help. It's such low risk. They're low risk transmitters. They're low risk environment. They're low risk in terms of contracting the disease. That the masks are an epiphenomenon. They're meaningless. Now, what drives the pandemic, the epidemic in these environments where sports are taking place, for example, in Wisconsin, was what it drives it everywhere else. Home transmission, non-sports transmission. Out of all the, I think it was, I want to get the numbers exactly. Yeah, it was over 30,000 high school athletes, and they only could document in this entire fall season 210 so-called cases. They're not cases, they're positive tests. And you heard the type of illness that fortunately these young people get. It's entirely cold flu-like spectrum.
Yep.
With rare exceptions, thank God.
Yep.
And so only 1 out of 200 positive tests with a known source were due to sport contact. That's 0.5%, whereas 55% were clearly in the home, and another 41% were clearly outside sports contact.
All right, let me ask you this, because they brought up the argument, which I'll ask you about the argument in a minute. I want to stick medically with data or your opinions, because I'm sure there's no studies on what I'm about to ask you. But they were basically—
Never know, Mike.
All right, I know you study a lot. They were basically saying it wasn't so much the spread of the disease on the field. They didn't want to give us privileges to do a team bus travel or group airplane travel that we weren't allowing to other students. We'll get to that argument in a second. But my question is this: is there any data that indicates that being on an airplane, being on a bus, in more condensed spaces, accelerates the spread?
We really don't. Like I said, Mike, to the best of our ability to do contact tracing studies, people are getting infected in the home environment, where there's much more intimate contact with people and much more prolonged contact. Have all these venues been studied with the same degree of rigor? Probably not. But those are the data that we have. That's what we have to live with. As far as this surface stuff, it was. I mean, I felt awful when one of the young men was talking about, and obviously I understand it because they want to play ball, but he would quote, clean the baseball if he had to. Yeah. Well, this we know about. It's not a surface contact transmission. It's transmitted.
We can say that with certainty now?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, listen, this was remarkable data that were reported through the British press. They've been culturing up the wazoo, the whole public transport system in London in particular. Do you know that they haven't been able to culture any virus? They haven't been able to get it, forget about culture, get it through PCR testing in the entire London tube since October. I'm generally millions of people are passing through the London
Are
tube.
people out
Yes.
actually using mass transit during these times?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all right,
It's sporadically,
all right.
and there's been restraints, and there's been temporary liftings of restraints. But yeah, people still have to circulate. But it's just not the way it spreads. It's not a poison.
All right,
It's not like ricin.
So here's a non-medical question, which is what they assume. They weren't told this directly, as one of the players said. This is what we inferred from what we heard from the Ivy League Council of Presidents. Now you're Brown credentialed, and you may still know some people over there, and you're a little bit familiar with Ivy League elitist thinking, like I am.
More than
They're saying the reason we shut down sports is because we couldn't give athletes other privileges like travel, and congregating in groups that we're not allowing for other students and faculty and other members of the Ivy League community. Do you buy that argument?
It doesn't surprise me in the least, but my response is, so what? I mean, they're not, this is the whole problem with this quasi or not so quasi totalitarian mindset. People are different. People do different things. A student athlete is different than a student. And there are certain things that I wouldn't really call them privileges. It's just part of what they do that they shouldn't be deprived of, or, frankly, they should be refunded their money and allowed to go somewhere else. I mean, this is just out of control when you see the rest of the conferences allowing their student athletes to play baseball. It's just not right.
All right.
Certain things are uncomplicated. This is wrong, what they're doing. And the justification is, I don't know what else to call it. It's pure wokeism. And that's not a justification. That's a non-justification.
It's got, while their argument holds a little sway, I will say the fact that they are the only, from a logical, you can kind of see that, but what blows that away and destroys that is the fact that every other athletic conference in America has found a way to do this.
No, it's not like that. It's you.
Why are they so?
You hit the nail on the head because they are the virtue signalers of virtue signalers.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they
have to lead the pack.
Yeah, they're the paragon of virtual signaling. So there you go.
Yep.
And so it boils down to a pure wokeism argument, which is not an argument. It's a form of insanity at this point.
We got about 10 minutes. So let's just zip
let's
through
go through where we are. And by the way, that's actually, it's important, Mike. The background for Rhode Island, where these guys would ostensibly be spending most of their time and now are spending most of their time, is very good. It's very good. We're doing really well. We're
going to look at that data.
Yeah,
we'll look at that in just a second. I want to just first get your reaction to this headline, because the Providence Journal brings a lot of stories in from USA Today. So take a look at this headline from a couple of days ago. Experts, U.S. needs UK-style lockdown. Because the Brits are so successful against these new variants.
And it repeats the lie about the UK variant that we went over last week. See, at a certain point, Mike, you just have to say it's a lie.
Right.
The UK.
I just need to hear you say it again.
It's a lie. The UK has studied the UK variant. Okay, the UK variant has been in the United States, as we pointed out last week, since November. The UK variant may be slightly more infectious. Yes and no, but probably. It is clearly not resulting in more hospitalizations, though there's a huge amount of data on that now. It is also really not associated with increased mortality when you look at at all the evidence that's available. When you have estimates that show, it's slightly protective, there's zero increased risk and there's slightly more risk, then you say there's no increased risk. I mean, that's just the way epidemiology works. And then you also, as you pointed out, commonsensically, is that you look at the overall picture in the UK, and it's wonderful. Infections, hospitalizations, and fatalities are dropping like a rock in the home of the UK variant. As far as the United States goes, it was reported in Rhode Island. It's been reported in California and Florida. It's made more inroads in Florida, and Florida is doing better than California and Rhode Island.
Yep.
Also, Denmark, Mike, these were amazing data that appeared after last week. Denmark's been tracking exactly how common the UK variant is in Denmark. Now, interestingly, over the last 6 weeks, now it would be 7 weeks, the UK variant has effectively become the most common viral strain in Denmark. Over that exact same 6-week period, the curve looks like this. The absolute number of infections has dropped precipitously at the same time that, as a percentage, the UK variant is so it's a meaningless statistic and also what that shows you, as we talked about last week, based on the UK data, is that there's no evidence that naturally acquired immunity or now even vaccine induced immunity is somehow being thwarted by this new variant. It's just not happening.
All right, let's go to good stuff again. Let's go to Rhode Island data. So here we have
these are the percent of positive tests. And by the way, Mike, I forgot to mention this, and it's really important. Any of these numbers that are below 3%, you have to, because they may stay there, basically. Well, this idea of zero COVID is another form of insanity. Again, first of all, this is not the bubonic plague, as Scott Atlas reminded us the other night, and it's certainly not smallpox, where you want a disease eradication model. It's just not the same thing. As you get down to these low numbers, you have to start to think again about the background rate of false positives, whether they're very high cycle threshold positives, which is a sort of a different animal, or true false positives, where we're possibly getting cross reactivity with other coronaviruses. That's about the sensitivity of the assay.
All right, so let's stay on this chart. Let me ask this: at what positivity rate point does the rate get to where we feel as a society comfortable enough to be out of emergency?
I'm there now. I'm there now. I'll raise my right hand. That's what I'm saying. I think.
Well, what point was that? Would you say it's 5%, 3%, 2%? What?
Oh, I'd certainly say where we are now. 2%, 3%. That's right. Again, that's right around the false positive background noise sort of level. And it's validated by what we're seeing going on clinically. Remember, this is just a test. It would be beautiful, Mike, if we could file another access to public records account and do the same thing we did for the spring. I bet you'd see the same thing. The percentage of these tests being over a cycle threshold of 25 or 30 is probably enormous now.
So would it be fair to say that while we still may choose to try to have recommended guidelines for, I know you don't agree with masks or social distancing or whatever, that at the current rates we're at now, the 2%, we should be done with emergency declarations.
The mask mandate should be over with. As a matter of fact, I give her great credit. Kim Kalunian interviewed James McDonald, and that very topic came up. Now, unfortunately, Dr. McDonald said that, we have to wait like 4 more months into the summer, before masking moves from being mandatory to recommended. We're there now, Mike.
If you got the vaccine, should you keep wearing a mask?
You've got the therapeutics, you've got the vaccines, you've got a vast amount of natural herd immunity being steadily augmented now as kinks are worked out in the delivery system by vaccine-induced immunity. I mean, why wait? And then, of course, Mike, let's not forget, I just discovered another study that I had missed, even bigger than the Danish DanMask trial on masking for COVID-19, which is obviously the most relevant. This was a bigger study of almost 6,500 Hajj pilgrims randomized to different tents.
Hajj, okay, wow.
Hajj pilgrims, to Mecca.
Yep.
And during the pilgrimage. Took several years to do. It was completed before the COVID era, but just published in the fall, and I had missed it. So they randomized to different tents, masking, no masking. Not only was there no prevention of respiratory viruses, mostly influenza, but they looked at a whole spectrum, in the laboratory. Clinical infection and laboratory confirmed infection. No, as a matter of fact, in terms of laboratory confection, those assigned to the masking tents had almost reached statistical significant increased risk of having infections. And yes, and the investigators, Mike, this was a classic line that only an academic could write. The investigators were disappointed that the poor Hajj pilgrims there to worship and do their thing, they failed to comply with the protocol, which was that they wear the mask 24 hours a day. But then they said, well, this might be a slightly unrealistic expectation. I was like, you think? But the bottom line was that here you have evidence, if anything, of a suggestion of a slightly increased risk with the ridiculous protocol, which if some people followed it meant that they were to wear the masks 24 hours a day. But this was an enormous study. And again, these studies are really difficult to do, but this was a wonderful environment to do such a study and randomize it by tent, and absolutely no benefit.
All right, let's finish up back to Rhode Island data. So here's hospitalizations. Steadily down. By the way, Gina loves my slides now, I think. She's pointing out how the hospitalizations are dropping like a rock. And of course, it's due to the wonderful vaccine delivery. Of course, it has obviously not very much to do with the vaccine delivery. Yeah, and I can note in looking at the data that new admissions are really, really way down.
New admissions are really down. Yeah, once people are in the hospital and they're sick, they have to be watched. So this will come down. But new admissions, absolutely. Eli Sherman had a really nice slide on that.
Yep, and mortality is well down too.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
All right,
but then these are the indicators.
But then, as I commented on my show yesterday, all of a sudden, now with all these positive trends, and with government needing to keep spreading the fear, they can't allow the fear factor to be. All of a sudden, they report on Monday 90 deaths. Somehow they reclassified death.
Oh, yeah, Mike, this is funny and absurd, but also dead serious. On the face page, and we kind of went through this also last week. On the face page, they have this category which is essentially newly reported, newly documented deaths. And of course, the average person, any person reading that is going to assume, oh, that's what happened yesterday. That's what happened in the last 24-hour period.
That's what they want you to think.
Well, you said it, and maybe they do, and maybe I believe they do, and so, but the point is, it's a dimensionless number, which doesn't mean anything. They didn't die on different days. No, people die in a set time period on a set day. And that's why when you show my graph each week, it's only by actual date of death. Right. Now, to its credit, the Department of Health does provide you those data. But as we showed last week, you have to go down into the Google document.
Though, right.
You have to go into the Google document. So that's and this is the kind of thing that, you got on me last week. But this is the kind of thing that I really do find upsetting, Mike, because it could be explained by Dr. Ncaa Alexander, Scott, exactly the way I'm explaining it, instead of in a very frankly manipulative way, which makes people frightened.
So just imagine, how do you go up there? So the article says only 9 deaths took place over the weekend, yet the headline says 9. So if you're Ncaa Alexander, Scott, the Rhode Island director, how do you go up there with a straight face knowing there are only 9 deaths in the last 3 days, and you walk up and you say so solemnly, today we are sad to report 90 additional deaths from COVID.
Right. It's decided. First, Mike, the point is you could easily get up there and say deaths dating back several months have now been adjudicated. It's a slow process. We're adding them to the tally, but reassuringly, deaths that are occurring on a day-to-day basis are going down. That's it. That's all you have to say.
That's the truth, right?
That's the truth. That's the
Instead,
truth.
they try to deceive you to spread the fear.
Yeah, and that's why since very early on, because I had never heard of it before, I said, what is this statistic, death by date of report? I've never heard of this before. You die on a day, it's plotted on the x-axis, and the y-axis is the number. That's it. There's no exceptions. There's no in between.
We'll probably get thrown off the air for this, but it kind of reminds me of the way they calculate mail ballots. All of a sudden, there's more mail ballots to report. Right now, we got more deaths to report. They didn't actually happen yesterday, but we
Mike, there have been some historic spikes that the colleagues of mine and myself that work for that collaborate for Rational Ground. I mean, the state of New Jersey and the state of New York would dump backdated deaths on one day, and you'd see this massive spike, like this giant phallic symbol, and we'd have to say, "What are you talking about?"
It's a family show here.
No, what are you talking about? This has no basis in reality. Describe the dates on which these actually occurred. And then they would go back and correct after being called out. So the phallic symbol would disappear.
Well, at least Go Local Prov in that article I shared did put in their headline, raising questions about Rhode Island DOH. I mean, how do you miss 90 deaths? Now the beauty of the whole thing, I love when things boomerang on people, is because of those extra 90 deaths reported, Rhode Island leaped all the way up to the third highest death rate per capita in the country. So it ended up embarrassing them.
Right.
Because they were screwing around with the data.
Well, but it raises other important questions, Mike. Were those adjudications justified? I have pointed out to you and before we started,
I got to tell you, before this past 4 months, I never heard the word adjudication before. We adjudicate ballots and now we adjudicate death certificates.
Well, I was given a really elegant report that was done, very detailed, very very granularly, composed. I was really impressed by the Florida state legislature, the House in Florida. At the time they went through over 11,000 death certificates over the summer, and they found just terrible, carelessness where, you'd see a death certificate and it would just have, COVID scribbled on it without any other, that's invalid. It's not appropriate. To all kinds of other abnormalities and excesses, which when I analyzed their data, I concluded that conservatively 40% of those deaths were not adequately designated. And so I think this state absolutely needs an audit of all the so-called COVID deaths so that we can begin to get our hands on, what actually happened.
All right.
And how many of these deaths were properly adjudicated, to use that word again.
Well said. It's just manipulation. I mean, whether they manipulated the data or not, it opens the door for those kinds of.
Well, CDC, right? It's not the state's. CDC opened this Pandora's box.
All right. Well, whoever did
CDC separated parts 1 and 2 of the death certificate adjudication of the death certificate designation process, where you're supposed to have a strict separation between causality and comorbidity.
Yeah.
They just lumped it all together, and it's inappropriate, and it's led to overcoding.
All right, Dr. Andrew Boston, thank you again for joining us, and appreciate your comments as always. We'll see you soon. Just to follow up on that point, folks, this adjudication, pulling out deaths all of a sudden, we don't know if it's true or not, and that's the problem. Just like we didn't know it was true or not with all those ballot dumps that came in Rhode Island and in the swing states. We don't know. But because they changed the rules, the CDC changed the rules on how deaths would be classified. States changed the rules on how ballots would be mailed, collected, and when they could be counted and under what circumstances. When you change the rules in the middle of anything, pandemic, election, you legitimately open the door for questions. Whether the data was manipulated or not, whether the votes were manipulated or not, how the hell do we know? But it certainly opens a door for legitimate questions, and that's the problem. They're playing around, and I believe they are manipulating it, the data, and the health departments. But anyway, well, what a great show today. Really want to thank the members of the Brown baseball team for their courage. Sad to hear they're facing recrimination on campus, and it's the worst kind of recrimination. People are hiding behind anonymous social media or other kinds of communications accounts, criticizing them, not so much for wanting to play ball, but because they appear. Can you imagine? Because they appeared on Fox News. And once you know that it just so happens that today, embarrassingly so, Democrats and the United States House held hearings on whether or not news outlets like Fox News and Newsmax should be taken off the air. It is more than embarrassing. It is frightening that government, they actually wrote a letter to cable providers. When a government official, president, member of Congress, committee chair writes a letter, that is government intimidation. That is a obvious violation of First Amendment rights. And that, we often confuse First Amendment stuff because only the government, can't discriminate against you for your speech. Private companies, news outlets can do, as private entities, they can do what they want, basically. They might suffer consequences for it in the public. But in this case, it is government directly interfering with free speech by threatening these cable providers to remove these news outlets that they disagree with. And it's stunning. I mean, it's stunningly stupid that they are actually proposing that somebody, now they don't tell us who, that somebody should be there to be the main arbiter of what is truth and what is not. Who the hell is that angel, as Milton Friedman once said, that we're going to trust to make those judgments? Who would you trust to do that on either side of the aisle? You can't. It's an impossible task. But again, these leftists who live in Never Land actually think it's a doable task. Actually think it's okay for government to mandate the removal of news stations and opinions that they disagree with. That somebody, some government appointed official or team of should be appointed to be our truth sayers, the arbiters of what's true and what's not. We had such truth arbiters in Rhode Island called PolitiFact. They would take a simple statement we would make and call us liar, liar, pants on fire. And after a while, we stopped trying to defend ourselves and we just called them out for the ridiculous, how can you be prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner all in one person? And that's what they tried to do. We called them out, and guess what? The next month they were done. They closed it down. I think we had a lot to do with that. You got to stand up to these tyrants, these authoritarian socialists. I encourage the Brown players to do such, and their captain said it best. Listen, we're not trying to downplay the seriousness of the pandemic. That's true. That's a great approach to take. But there is strength in numbers and voices, and I hope the Brown players and other Ivy League student athletes, men and women, will band together and try to it's not too late to overturn and to salvage some part of this spring season. It's only February. It's not too late. Most of those seasons don't start till March. Or April. Fight for what you believe in. That's what we do. So thank you for joining us today. Terrific show. Again, thanks to the Brown players. Thanks to Dr. Boston. Thanks to Larry the Liberty Guy. We will see you tomorrow. Dan Duquette, former general manager of the Boston Red Sox, will be our guest. No politics tomorrow, just baseball for the first half of the show.